Have you ever complained about your boring job? Maybe you've grumbled about making coffee for your boss, entering endless numbers into Excel, or pulling all-nighters until you see your computer screen more than you see your partner. Trust me, no matter how miserable your 9-to-5 feels, it doesn't even come close to being a servant for the Pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Think your boss is a nightmare? Wait until you meet the guy an entire civilization believed was a living god. In Egypt, the Pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was the embodiment of the gods, the bridge between heaven and earth, and the man who literally held life and death in his hands. On paper, serving him was the ultimate honor. In reality, it was basically a life sentence with no parole. Servants had no weekends off, no labor unions to complain to, and absolutely no margin for error. Every move, from holding up a mirror, pouring water, to rubbing fragrant oils into his divine skin, had to be flawless. A single frown from him could erase your existence. Sure, it looked glamorous on the outside. Gold, palaces, ceremonies, it's easy to be dazzled. But behind that glittering curtain were untold tragedies. Servants weren't just staff. They were living props in sacred rituals, sacrifices at royal funerals, and sometimes even spiritual furniture, buried alive to accompany their master into eternity. If you think modern labor contracts are unfair, imagine one with no end date, no paycheck, and occasional payment in blood. In this journey, we're going to peel back the layers of mystery around what it really meant to serve the Pharaoh. Why was this so-called great honor more like a personal hell? What did a typical day in their lives look like? Morning to night, without a shred of freedom? And how did these ordinary people become both the pillars of divine power and the victims of its cruelty? So before we step through the massive stone gates of the Egyptian palace, take a deep breath. What you're about to hear isn't a story of golden glory. It's a deep dive into a historical nightmare, one that's chilling, ironic, and maybe a little too relatable. If you're ready, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because from here on out, we're going to uncover the truths that your history textbooks left out. Why would a great honor feel more like a life sentence? That dramatic question is the perfect doorway into the royal court of ancient Egypt, where one word of praise from the Pharaoh could launch you to dizzying heights of glory, while a single frown could send your entire life tumbling off a cliff. Here, being chosen didn't mean freedom or happiness. It meant becoming a cog in a sacred machine, running day and night to preserve one unshakable idea. The Pharaoh was a living god. And when your boss is divine, forget about clocking out at 5 o'clock. Picture this: dawn on the Nile. The sun peeks over the horizon, painting golden streaks across the palace roof. The whole world seems to come alive on cue. Temple music swelling, incense drifting through massive stone columns, statues of gods staring down with coal-lined eyes. And at the very center of this grand theater, the Pharaoh appears. Not as a mere king, but as the breathing incarnation of Horus, the son of Ra, protector of cosmic order, Mayat, everything. The pulse of the Nile, the whispers in the stone corridors, served as a backdrop to remind you of one truth. His power wasn't just political. It was the gravitational pull keeping the universe from collapsing. Impressive? Absolutely. But if you were a new servant stepping into this gilded world, congratulations. You'd just entered a place where beauty and terror clung together as tightly as gold leaf on a statue's face. To outsiders, you looked enviable, dressed in spotless linen, perfumed with expensive oils, trailing clouds of incense wherever you walked. Your title sounded prestigious: bearer of the king's fragrance, keeper of the seal, pourer of wine for his majesty. Yet behind those stone doors, you'd quickly learn that every so-called privilege was paid for with you. First rule: Pharaoh wasn't a political leader. He was the nightmare version of a work calendar. To the Egyptians, the universe itself needed daily rituals to function, which meant the palace had no word for weekend. Your schedule was the god's schedule. Sunrise, offering rites; midday, purification rites; sunset, farewell rites to the sun; midnight, protective rites. Each time, you were part of the machinery. Washing, anointing, carrying offerings, adjusting the crown, pouring wine, copying prayers. Most of the time, you didn't speak, didn't meet his eyes, and absolutely didn't make mistakes. And if you thought mistakes meant spilling a tray of wine, sorry. It could also mean breathing out of rhythm while the priest was chanting. Yes, in a world where power was sacred, even your breathing had a script. So how did an ordinary person by the Nile end up here? 3 paths. First, family. If you were born into a household already tied to the Pharaoh's vast the royal household administration, you followed in their footsteps. Dad managed the grain stores, Mom perfumed the queen, and one day you carried a tray yourself. Second, education. If you were clever, with neat handwriting, a temple scribe or official might recruit you. You trained on wooden tablets with black ink, ancient Egypt's version of an iPad, mastering read-copy-carve drills until you became a scribe. Do well, keep your head down, and you might earn a spot inside the palace. Third, conquest. Not romantic at all. War captives, slaves, or their descendants eventually got Egyptianized and assigned to kitchens, storerooms, or stables. Whichever path you took, the moment you stepped through those stone gates, your personal identity began to fade. From then on, you weren't a person. You were a role. And that role had a whole vocabulary. The Imayar Pirki, the overseer of the house, was like the COO of this ancient corporate empire, running supplies, staff, and ceremonies. Below him were the WDPW, literally carriers and presenters, the errand runners, fetching oils, pulling linen curtains, carrying offerings. Closest to the king were the Kenti Hem, intimate attendants responsible for physically touching the pharaoh's body, washing, combing his hair, painting his eyes with kohl, clipping his nails, even collecting any stray hairs that fell. Yes, that was a job, because the god king's hair wasn't supposed to litter the palace floor like cat fur. Titles sounded elegant because they were meant to. A fancy label to disguise one simple fact. This was precision labor where even half a mistake could get you punished. And the perks? Well, you ate from the royal kitchens, but eating well didn't mean eating your fill. Most of the good stuff went straight to ceremonial tables. You wore fine linen, but linen is still linen when you're kneeling 3 times a day. You breathed in costly perfumes, but the scent soaked so deep into your skin and hair that when you stepped into the marketplace, everyone knew you worked for the palace. That meant 2 invisible shadows followed you everywhere: admiration and fear. People respected you because you were close to divinity, but they also kept their distance, because one careless word from you could echo back to the man everyone called the sun on earth. And days off? Forget it. The gods didn't rest, and neither did their human servants. While the sun god Ra was sailing through the underworld at night, fighting the chaos serpent Apep, you were busy arranging lamps, refreshing incense, fanning your divine boss with ostrich feathers, and standing absolutely silent. On festival days, like the Great Opet Festival in Thebes, your workload didn't ease, it multiplied. Imagine hauling a massive gold-plated shrine on your shoulders through city streets, with the entire population watching. Exhilarating? Sure. Terrifying? Definitely. Trip, stumble, or fall. Don't even think about it. That was called an honor. But really, it was an honor hanging by a thread. Do you get to complain? No. Do you have a union? Ancient Egypt records the world's first labor strike at Deir el-Medina under Ramesses III, craftsmen demanding their rations of bread. But that was out on the tomb work sites, not inside the palace. In the palace, grievance was a dangerous word. You might have an uncle, a brother, a close colleague, the little capillaries of ordinary human life. But the moment ritual time began, every relationship vanished. Only your role remained. And that role was sealed with Egypt's legendary pair of syllables. Ma'at, cosmic order, balance, the rightness of the universe. Anyone who bent Ma'at was at fault. Anyone who kept it straight earned virtue. Convenient, isn't it? Anything you did for the pharaoh automatically counted as right, while anything you wanted for yourself, an extra hour of sleep, a louder breath, could be wrong. The ideology was so elegant and so sly that even your own fatigue made you feel guilty. That's the deepest psychological price. You learn how to disappear. Not disappear from the earth, Though yes, that happened to a few unlucky souls. But disappear as a person. You speak in pre-approved phrases. You see from trained angles. You step in rehearsed rhythms. You become the hand of ritual, the breath of service, the shadow of power. And since doing your job well means being invisible, the better you are, the more you vanish. A beautiful, brutal paradox. But there had to be some upside, right? Sure, sometimes. There was a ladder. Exceptional attendants could be granted a name inscription, gifts, even a tomb of their own. A major honor in Egypt, where death was the longest-running project of your life. You might become an overseer of the seal, a storehouse chief, a royal wine steward, expanding your command over resources. Maybe you could send your son to a scribal school. Once he belonged to the world of writing, he wasn't just a beast of burden for fate. And yet even at the top, you still orbited the same sun. Your house might grow larger, but the windows still face the temple. Time to be blunt. Palace glamour doesn't mop up a servant's sweat. Every layer of gold leaf over the clay of ritual is a thin cover for a simple truth. The palace is a factory. It mass-produces cosmic order with inputs of grain, oil, incense, words, and people. Grain hauled from the delta, oils bargained out of the Levant, incense cooked from resin, prayers carved into stone, and your ribcage borrowed to measure breath on cue. Day shift, night shift, always humming. And the production board set before the god statue reads, Ma'at maintained. What I want you to see isn't just hardship, but the mechanism. Egypt built a system that turned honor into a velvet shackle. They understood humans live by stories, so they gave you the most dazzling story of all. You serve a god. You are part of the cosmos. They let you touch gold leaf, breathe frankincense, hear hymns in ancient Egyptian, hieroglyphs for stone, hieratic for daily script. They walked you through corridors where reliefs show the pharaoh defeating chaos, and then, very gently, they told you, stand here, don't move. Now do you see why this great honor feels like a life sentence? It has no end date, no boundaries, and no appeals. From the day you step inside, your time is not yours, your space is not yours, your voice is not yours. You never know which day the stone door closes behind you for the last time. In a court where loss of face for the god could translate into loss of head for the human, uncertainty is the law. It's not posted on the wall in gold letters. Everyone just knows. Generation after generation, the system survived because it enjoyed a rare luxury. Aesthetic consensus. The ancient Egyptians believed the beautiful was the true, and the true was the beautiful. Every straight column, every perfect statue proportion, every measured hymn was right because it was beautiful, and beautiful because it was right. You, the servant, were audience, actor, and assembly line worker in this aesthetic enterprise. That's why when we say hell, there's no fire here. There's scent and gold and music and fine linen. It's a polite hell where you're required to smile. Of course, in that dense forest of rules, small human paths still formed. You might split a piece of bread with a coworker, slip a joke behind a column, exchange a grateful glance when a supervisor quietly nudged your incense bowl back on beat. Life crept in like the Nile seeping into fields. But don't confuse seepage with flood. The water receded, the field dried. You returned to position. Back straight, pulse steady, eyes lowered. Compare this to other courts to feel Egypt's absolutism. In Rome, the emperor was princeps, first citizen, only later deified. In China, the emperor was the son of heaven. Heaven's mandate could in theory be revoked. In Egypt, especially at its strongest, the pharaoh didn't wait for heaven to sign off. He was the equation, heaven plus earth. Your relationship wasn't subject-master, it was mortal-divine. Your margin for error approached zero. Heavy, yes, but look closely and you notice something odd. The weight is why it lasted. A strict braid of rules turned thousands of people into a single body, and servants were the soft tissue of that body. You kept the smell of ordinary life off the throne. You bridged the sweat of harvesters to the fragrance of the temple. You made sure that when the Pharaoh stepped down a stair, his foot didn't snag on a single fallen hair, his own. Literally, you were the skin that kept myth from cracking. So what's the exact price tag? Your body, standing, kneeling, lifting, steadying, carrying, presenting. Your emotions, folded and put away lest a sigh slip out. Your mind, memorizing liturgy, mapping placements, counting beats, thinking for other people. Your time, gone, and your future, stretching down the same corridor, past the same reliefs, with only the name on the altar changing. Sound like a sentence? It is, signed in scented ink. You might say, better to farm outside. Maybe. But Egyptian farmers had their own sentence: flood and drought, taxes and corvée labor, fate. Outside, you were a stalk in a sea of grain. Inside, you were a stick of incense in a temple. Both burned so others could see the light. The difference? Inside, the light was brighter. And we've only talked about the meaning, not your schedule. We haven't touched the bizarre details that make a palace job description read like dark comedy. Massaging sacred forearms with perfumed oils, collecting every single hair from the ritual bath. Keeping time in hymns, carrying lamps down a corridor where your shadow must never fall across a god's statue. That's a taboo. Think you've known work pressure? Wait until you see their day. Because if everything I've said makes this sound like a tedious but elegant job, you haven't seen morning. Palace mornings aren't like any morning you know. No coffee, only incense. No alarms, only trumpets. No stand-up meeting, only a ritual orchestra and the unblinking eyes of stone gods tracking your every move. If you slip half a breath off the beat, the whole universe, yes, literally, in Egyptian terms, holds its breath for a heartbeat. And that's where we go next. If you think the honor of serving the Pharaoh is just a silk ribbon tied lightly around a life, come step through the next door. There, before the sky even blushes, attendants are already on their feet. Oils are warm, water is drawn, prayers are penned, and dozens of hands are waiting for a day that cannot include a single mistake. Ready to see how they actually lived? Chapter 2 opens the day in the life ledger, from the first drop of water on the Pharaoh's shoulder to the last note at sunset. Each moment a test. And trust me, there are details there that would make even the worst 21st century job quietly admit, yeah, we lose. Have you ever complained that your job description is vague, endless, and reads like some cursed government scroll? Trust me, you're lucky. Because in ancient Egypt, being a servant in Pharaoh's palace came with a job description longer than an entire papyrus roll, and not a single line of it was something you'd willingly sign. Who needs a resume when all it takes is bad luck or fate's dark sense of humor to get hired into the most extravagant circus in human history, the Egyptian royal court? Picture a typical day for one of these attendants. And I stress the word typical because in this world, ordinary means waking up before the sun dares to peek over the Nile, all to prepare for your boss, who just so happens to be worshipped as a living god. You haven't even rubbed the sleep out of your eyes before the blare of trumpets and pounding drums echo through the cool dawn air. For you, that's not a soundtrack of romance. That's a fire alarm. Translation: get up, Ra has risen. Pharaoh will stir soon. And if you're late, your chances of making it through today just dropped dramatically. First mission? Preparing the Pharaoh's sacred bath. Yes, while most of us are still fumbling for a toothbrush, you're organizing a full squad armed with bronze basins, perfumed water, resins mixed with exotic oils, and linen towels so white they could blind you. Pharaoh doesn't just bathe, he purifies, in a ritual fit for gods. And you? You're not a personal hygiene assistant. You're stage crew in a cosmic performance where the audience is the pantheon itself. Spill a few drops of that imported cedar oil? Sorry, you've just offended the gods, and you know what that means. But don't relax. Your duties don't stop at bathroom attendant. After the ritual cleansing, you transform Pharaoh into the living embodiment of Horus, oiling his body, smoothing his hair, applying makeup, painting kohl, the jet black eyeliner that gave Egyptian eyes their iconic look. And remember, every line must be sharp, every stroke flawless, because Pharaoh isn't just a man. He's the literal face of cosmic order. Ma'at. One crooked smudge doesn't just ruin the vibe. It symbolically tilts the entire universe. No pressure, right? Think you're done? Hardly. You'll trim his fingernails and toenails. You'll collect every stray hair from his pillow and bath, making sure no sorcerer or nosy rival can hex him with it. You'll arrange his linen robes so perfectly that sunlight from the Nile glints off the folds like glass. In short, you're spa therapist, stylist, and human Roomba rolled into one. Weekend off? Nope. Tips? Forget it. A thank you? Don't make me laugh. Maybe you're thinking, okay, sounds like working at a 5-star resort. The palace must have been glamorous. Glamorous? Absolutely. But you'll never enjoy it. While Pharaoh reclines on plush beds, you sleep on a straw mat. While he soaks in oils, you pour them without ever touching a drop for yourself. While nobles sip honey beer at banquets, you scurry around, hauling trays of roasted goose to their tables. For Pharaoh, paradise. For you, purgatory. And as if that weren't enough, you double as a living prop in endless rituals. At sunrise, you might stand for hours holding a sacred instrument, drumming out the beat for Ra's morning hymn. No one cares if you have rhythm. Just don't miss a beat. Hit the wrong note, and it's not a bad review. It's blasphemy. Yes, playoff key here, and the penalty isn't embarrassment, it's execution. But the real horror isn't just the workload, it's the suffocating lack of freedom. Not one moment of the day belongs to you. You wake before Pharaoh opens his eyes, and you're still on duty after he closes them. Every breath, every motion revolves around a man who is treated as divine. And because he's divine, you can't complain. You can't ask for a raise. You definitely can't request vacation. In today's world, you can call in sick to dodge a meeting. In ancient Egypt, sneeze in Pharaoh's presence. And congratulations, you may have just sneezed your way out of existence. Here's the cruel irony. Palace servants were admired by outsiders. Ordinary Egyptians thought you were lucky. You got scraps from royal banquets, hand-me-down robes from the palace wardrobe, the faint aura of standing near a god. What they didn't see was you baking in the sun for hours, holding a feather fan, or bowing so low you kissed the floor because Pharaoh happened to sneeze. Yes, sneeze. Because every gesture he made could be a sacred sign. Failed to react properly, and you'd crossed into blasphemy. We love to marvel at pyramids, giant statues, and dazzling ceremonies. But behind that glow were nameless people, living tools with no freedom of their own. Today we call a desk job 9 to 5. Serving Pharaoh? Try sunrise to whenever the God King decides to sleep. And sometimes, even then, you're stuck standing guard to make sure his dreams run smoothly. And here's the kicker, folks. That's just the morning shift. Pharaoh hasn't even eaten breakfast yet. He hasn't stepped into the courtyard, hasn't attended a single ceremony. And you're already exhausted. But don't relax, because what comes next makes trimming toenails look merciful. If you thought your day job was soul-sucking, wait until you see what else is on the schedule. So you thought the bizarre morning routine had already wrung every drop of strength out of you? Congratulations, you've only just made it to lunch. And before Pharaoh so much as touches a crumb of bread, you, the faithful servant, or, let's be honest, the prisoner of extravagance, are already staring down another round of rituals dressed up as daily duties. First comes the sacred pre-lunch show. Pharaoh doesn't eat like normal mortals. Every meal kicks off with feeding the gods first. That means you and your fellow attendants lug roasted oxen, baskets of bread, jars of honey beer, and amphorae of wine into the temple courtyard. Everything has to be lined up in the exact sacred order on the altar. And don't even think about sneaking a taste. That beef is officially stamped for Amun. That bread belongs to Osiris. Your role is to lay it all out, let the incense curl upward as if the gods themselves have taken a bite, then clear it all away and haul it straight back to the palace, where Pharaoh and his buddies will do the actual eating. Translation: even the gods get served before you do. When the offerings are out of the way, lunch for Pharaoh finally begins. And now you're less a waiter and more a backstage tech in a Broadway show with a single critic who could literally end your career and your existence in the same afternoon. You stand behind the golden chair, ensuring Pharaoh's goblet never runs dry. The linen napkin appears on cue, and every dish hits the table at exactly the right temperature. Sounds glamorous, like working at a Michelin-starred restaurant? Sure, except here, one frown doesn't mean a bad Yelp review. It means you might vanish, permanently. You think the banquet's your breather? Wrong again. Afternoons in the palace are reserved for more rituals and lavish receptions with nobles, generals, or foreign dignitaries. And you're the engine that keeps the spectacle whirring. Pouring wine, carrying trays, waving ostrich feather fans, or worse, standing completely still as part of the set design. Imagine sweat trickling down your back under the Nile sun, your arms locked in place, and you can't even lift a hand to wipe your brow. Because no one's supposed to look at you. The spotlight's only on Pharaoh. And sometimes, attendants aren't just silent props, they're conscripted entertainers. One might be told to dance, another to play a lute, another to dress up as a god from myth. Just picture this. In the morning you clipped Pharaoh's toenails, and by afternoon you're painted head to toe as Anubis, the jackal-headed god of death, pounding on a ceremonial drum. Around here, multitasking isn't a buzzword on your resume, it's survival. You're singer, dancer, actor, servant, and prop, all rolled into one overworked, underpaid, and utterly disposable body. As the feast swells to its peak, so does your workload. Servants line the hall, passing goblets, clearing scraps, ferrying torches, and keeping expressions neutral. Smile, frown, or even twitch wrong, and you're in danger. Because Pharaoh might be drunk, and a drunk god king makes a sober god king look merciful. One careless word, one clumsy step, even a glance held too long can be read as an insult. And in this palace, the dessert you choke down isn't figs or honey cakes, it's fear. When the last cup is drained and the nobles stumble off, you'd think the nightmare ends. But no. You clean, scrub, reset, and prep for what's next. Because in Egypt, everything is ritual. Pharaoh sipping beer? Ritual. Pharaoh stepping into the garden to admire a lotus bloom? Ritual. And you're the cog that keeps it all turning. And when a cog slips, the machine doesn't break. The cog does. By late afternoon, the lines blur. You don't know if you're serving, acting, or simply existing. Your entire identity dissolves into Pharaoh's schedule. You have no time, no space, no self. You're not a person. You're a function, a moving part in the theater of divine power. And this is only the afternoon. Pharaoh still has a full program of evening ceremonies waiting. Prayers before sleep, cosmic rituals, maybe a dash of astrology for good measure. And you? Still on call. Because here, the day doesn't end with sunset. Night only makes the fear thicker, the rituals heavier, and the suffocation worse. So inhale deeply while you still can, because what comes next makes 14-hour office shifts sound like a vacation. In this palace, a single mistake, a raised eyebrow from Pharaoh, is enough to turn you instantly from servant into a forgotten ghost. Have you ever worked under so much stress that one tiny mistake could cost you your job? Now imagine that, but instead of being fired, you're dragged away and never seen again. Welcome to the Pharaoh's palace at night, the time when fear and control reached their peak. As the sun set over the Nile, the palace didn't fall silent. Far from it. Night gave Pharaoh's power a darker, more terrifying glow. In the torchlit corridors, every step, every glance, every breath from a servant like you had to be flawless. Because in the dark, the living god's patience was even shorter. And when his patience snapped, so did lives. There's a story whispered among the palace staff. A young servant once dropped Pharaoh's golden comb while grooming him. Just a soft clink on the stone floor. But the room froze as if someone had opened a tomb. Pharaoh didn't yell. He simply frowned. And that was enough. Guards marched in, dragged the boy out, and he was never seen again. When others dared to ask what happened, the only response was a fearful shake of the head. In ancient Egypt, vanishing wasn't a rumor. It was policy, a political weapon sharpened into pure terror. And if you didn't vanish, well, punishment was always waiting. The whip was a constant companion. A smudge on Pharaoh's robe? Whip. Pouring wine at the wrong rhythm? Whip. Standing half a step out of line during a ritual? Whip again. But flogging was just the beginning. Servants could be bound, dragged across stone floors, or locked in dark chambers for days. Since Pharaoh was considered a living god, every punishment was reframed as divine justice. Think about that. It's bad enough being punished by your boss, but when your boss is supposedly a deity, how do you even protest? The cruelest part wasn't the beatings. It was the psychological cage. Your words, your gestures, even your thoughts felt monitored. Privacy didn't exist. You slept shoulder to shoulder with other servants, ate only when ordered, and never stepped outside the palace without permission. Love was forbidden. Marriage had to be approved. Even your children, if born in the palace, might be taken away for other holy purposes. This wasn't a job. This was a gilded prison. And unlike Rome or China, where emperors at least had to bargain with senators or mandarins, Pharaoh answered to no one. He was the god Horus on earth, the son of Ra. If he wanted you gone, you were gone. Without trial, without appeal, without a trace. Serving Pharaoh was like walking a tightrope without a safety net. One slip, and you weren't just unemployed. You were erased. Adding to the dread, there was an entire surveillance system in place. Palace officials monitored servants like hawks, recording every misstep to report upward. It wasn't just Pharaoh you feared, it was everyone around you. Fellow servants were encouraged to snitch, bribed with scraps of food or tiny favors. Imagine living in a world where anyone, a colleague, even a friend, might betray you to save themselves. This was the true climax of the nightmare, not just losing your freedom, but losing your very sense of self. You stopped thinking, stopped dreaming, stopped hoping. Your life was swallowed whole by a machine designed to serve one man, dressed up as a sacred honor. You were chained and forced to smile. You lived in fear, but told yourself it was happiness. That was the genius and cruelty of the system, a prison disguised as privilege. And yet, the most chilling truth was still to come. Beatings and disappearances were only the surface. As we'll see in the next chapter, servants weren't just living tools. They could also become sacrifices in rituals too dark to describe. If you think physical punishment was bad, wait until you see what happened when even your soul was pulled into the Pharaoh's power game. Have you ever thought of a ritual as a quiet prayer? Soft music in the background? Maybe some incense and chanting? Think again. In ancient Egypt, a ritual was a full-blown stage production. Grand, terrifying, and precise, as if the entire universe were watching. And who played the supporting cast in this never-ending drama? That's right, the Pharaoh's servants. Picture dawn on the Nile. The drums boom, flutes wail. Not to entertain, but to rouse Ra, the sun god, for his daily journey across the sky. Servants don't get to be casual backup musicians here. They line up like soldiers, clutching instruments that are more props than tools, striking every beat with military precision. One wrong note, one rhythm out of sync, and it isn't just oops. It's an insult to the gods. The punishment, a beating, or worse. Suddenly, that nightmare where you accidentally hit reply all on the wrong email doesn't seem so bad. Try missing a note in a hymn meant to keep the sun rising. But the musical routine is just the warm-up. As soon as the sun is officially welcomed, the servants sprint to Pharaoh's quarters to prepare the purification ritual. Don't picture a quick shower. Think more like a sacred spa day, where the stakes are life or death. Water is drawn from the Nile or a holy well, filtered through spotless linen, sometimes infused with resin or blue lotus petals. The temperature has to be just right, too cold or too hot, and you risk souring Pharaoh's divine mood faster than the river's tides. Once bathed, Pharaoh is oiled and painted into a living god. Servants massage sacred oils into his skin, not just for moisture, but to ward off demons and disease. Then comes the eyeliner. Coal, ground from galena, smeared in sharp black lines around the eyes. Egyptians believed it protected against the sun and the evil eye. And who applies it? You, with your trembling hands. A smudge, a crooked line, and you might as well start writing your own funeral inscription. The duties don't stop at makeup. Every strand of hair that falls from Pharaoh's head is sacred. Every clipped nail, every fiber of his linen robe. Servants scrambled to gather them all, because in the wrong hands, those scraps could fuel curses and dark magic. Imagine being reduced to a human Roomba, crawling around picking up hair, except one missed strand might count as treason. A civilization that could raise pyramids still needed a squadron of humans to chase down Pharaoh's dandruff. And if the daily grind sounds humiliating enough, the rituals take a darker turn. In ceremonies for Osiris, the god of the underworld, servants sometimes had to play the role of sacrificial victims. They knelt, lay still, and let priests mime killing them as part of the show. Lucky ones just pretended. The unlucky? Archaeology from Abydos suggests some were truly sacrificed, buried with Pharaoh so they could keep serving him in the next world. No, not retirement. Forced permanent transfer. Later, Egyptians softened the horror with ushabti, little figurines buried with the dead, enchanted to take on chores in the afterlife. Call it the first outsourcing model. A small mercy, unless you happen to live before that innovation. If you were chosen, you didn't get a gold watch for years of service. You got a tomb. Politically, it was genius. By turning servants into living props, Pharaoh broadcast one chilling message. I own your life, your death, and even your afterlife. Rome had gladiators to prove imperial power. China had the mandate of heaven to justify the emperor. Egypt weaponized daily life itself. Every breath of a servant was another stone in Pharaoh's cosmic pyramid. No weekends, no time off, not even death to call your own. Modern jobs can feel suffocating, sure. Endless deadlines, constant meetings. But imagine a deadline that literally means the end of your life. One wrong step in a ceremony, one fumbled line in a hymn, and you'd vanish from history. And that's just what we know. Whispers of darker rites persist. Rumors that human blood fed the gods, that some servants were drained not just of their freedom but of their very lives. Whether myth or truth, one thing is certain. In Pharaoh's palace, every heartbeat you had was on loan. Cliffhanger. Think the danger ended with funerals and sacrifice? Not even close. For many servants, life itself was one long ritual. A theater stage where every move, every breath, belonged not to them but to Pharaoh. And the scariest part? The curtain never came down. Remember when I said Pharaoh's servants could become living props in rituals? Buckle up, because the stage is about to get darker, colder, and deadlier. If plucking stray hairs from Pharaoh's robe sounded absurd, this part will make you realize some servants never even got the chance. They weren't cleaning up after the rituals. They were the rituals. Picture a royal funeral in ancient Egypt. Not a quiet family gathering, but a national event. Days of processions, priests, incense, music, and crowds. And at the center, Pharaoh's body, swaddled like a god returning to the stars. The closest servants didn't just stand by the coffin like honor guards. In some dynasties, they were chosen to accompany Pharaoh into the afterlife. Permanently. That's not legend, it's archaeology. At Abydos, one of Egypt's oldest royal burial sites, archaeologists uncovered dozens of small graves clustered around Pharaoh's tomb. The skeletons were mostly young, healthy adults. No signs of disease, no battle wounds. Some scholars believe they were poisoned, strangled, or killed quickly, just before burial. Why? To keep serving Pharaoh in the world beyond. A great honor, yes. But really, a death sentence gift-wrapped in gold. Maybe you're thinking, that must have been in the early brutal days. Surely later Egypt was more civilized. To a degree, yes. By the Pyramid Age, real people were swapped out for ushabti, small clay figurines inscribed with spells to do chores in the afterlife. But don't sigh in relief too fast. Ushabti didn't mean Pharaoh suddenly valued his servants as individuals. It just meant replacing living tools with symbolic ones was cheaper and cleaner. The mindset stayed the same. Servants were never free people, just instruments of power, whether flesh and blood or clay. Take the Sed Festival, for example, a rejuvenation ritual staged after 30 years on the throne. Pharaoh had to prove his vitality by running laps in a sacred courtyard. Who arranged the props, set the pace, tuned the music? The servants. And if Pharaoh stumbled or the ritual faltered? Forget excuses. The guilty parties could simply disappear. In Egypt, you didn't just risk your job, you risked your existence. Being a servant, then, was a contract without end. Not just working until you died, but sometimes dying was the job. Think your overtime is bad? Try overtime that extends into the afterlife. The darkest part, though, wasn't even the killing. It was the mind control. Rituals weren't just theater, they were ideology. Day after day, year after year, servants sang, danced, bowed, and bled for Pharaoh. And slowly, they began to believe it. That their only purpose in life was to serve. Pharaoh's true genius wasn't ruling with whips. It was rewriting reality inside his servants' heads. Other empires flexed their power differently. Rome had gladiators, blood spectacles in the Colosseum. China had the mandate of heaven, a cosmic justification that could be revoked. But Egypt? Egypt went further. It turned living people into ritual objects, blending religion and politics so tightly that servants didn't just fear sacrifice. They accepted it as natural. That's control at its most absolute. Now look again at those pyramids that tourists marvel at today. They're not just tombs. They're monuments to power machines. Built not only with stone, but with sweat, blood, and unnamed lives. Every block of limestone is also a gravestone for someone who labored or died unseen. And here's the takeaway for us. Behind every glittering system of power lies a shadow. What looks like honor may actually be a cage. Forced labor, whether wrapped in religion or prestige, is still exploitation. You may think, thank God we don't live like that anymore. But be careful. History has a way of repeating itself in quieter, subtler forms. When modern jobs demand all your health, your time, and even your identity to serve a boss or a system, aren't we still trapped in pyramids of our own making? That's the chilling punchline. Pharaoh is long gone, but the ghost of absolute power and blind service still lingers. And if you want to keep peeling back history's curtain, don't stop here. The real secrets are never in the spotlight. They hide in the shadows, under the stones, waiting for someone willing to look past the gold.